So we're in for a real treat today. Today we're at the Savoy Automobile Museum in Cartersville, Georgia. My name is Steve Starling and I'm a volunteer docent here at the museum. Today we're going to take a look at the 5 automobiles that comprised the Savoy Customs exhibit at the museum. That exhibit was on display from August the 2nd of 2022 through January 8th of 2023. So we're doing this for the museum archives. Today's date is December 19th, so let's get started. So the Savoy Customs exhibit was on display in Gallery B of the museum just outside the presentation theater. But before we start looking at the individual cars, let's talk about some terminology that we'll use today. Some of this is pretty basic, but some folks might not know it. If you imagine that the universe of automobiles is divided into automobiles that are stock and automobiles that are custom. A stock car is a car that's in the same condition, same configuration, if you will, that it was in when it rolled off the showroom floor. A custom, on the other hand, is a car that has been modified in some way, either to enhance performance or for driver comfort, usually both. Another term that we'll use today is Restomod. A Restomod is a car that has been both restored and modified. All Restomods are by definition customs, but not all customs are Restomods. So now let's take a look at a beautiful Restomod Ford pickup truck from 1950. So the first vehicle that we're going to talk about as a part of this exhibit is this beautiful 1950 Ford F1 pickup truck. It's gorgeous. I'll talk more about this in a minute, but the color is called Miami Cream. It's gotten so much attention since the exhibit opened. Before we start talking about this truck though, I need to go back and give you some information from a historical context about the times. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in December of 1941. A few weeks thereafter, U.S. automobile production for civilian use totally stopped. Instead, the automakers began to build airplanes and tanks and military vehicles and other things. Civilian automobile production didn't begin again until after the war, late in 1945. So because of this, there was this pent-up demand from the American public for automobiles and for trucks. Now, our society was a much more agrarian one back then, and people needed trucks for farming. So in 1945, late 45, 46, and 47, the automakers built only pre-war models. They didn't need to develop new models because the pre-war models sold just fine because people were desperate for them. But Ford began to plan ahead and began to develop for 1948 the F-Series of pickup trucks. These were going to be, for the first time for Ford, built on a chassis specifically designed for a truck. They also were going to be more comfortable for people to ride in and to use. In fact, they invested over $1 million in developing the cab of the 48 pickup. And this is a 50 pickup, but the cab is very, very similar. Very few changes from 48 to 50. At any rate, Ford called this the $1 million cab in their advertising for 1948. And when they released the new model, it was quite a success. They offered 8 lines of trucks in the F-Series, F1 up to F8. And that F-Series pickup truck from Ford is still so popular today. Now let's talk about some of the different features of the pickup truck. I'm going to move up to the front here. Again, it's just gorgeous. All the chrome, the horizontal chrome bars here on the grille. Up here you've got the hood latch. You open the hood here. Down the side, you've got vents up there as well. Down the side, you've got vents with the Ford logo just here. And as you go back, again, this cab is just gorgeous. They designed it to be wider and to have more headroom than the previous models. And we'll go inside in just a minute, but just a gorgeous truck. Look how the lines flow down the side of this pickup truck. An interesting feature that I'll also point out here is that the cab actually extends out over the running board. But when you open the door, it's a big door. When you open the door, you can easily step up on the running board and get into the truck. Just great design all around from Ford. The bed back here is 6.5 feet long, and we're going to take a look in a moment at the floor of the bed, and you'll see that it's just gorgeous as well. So now we're going to go inside what Ford called the $1 million cab, and this is just gorgeous. You can see that they've carried the Miami cream color on the exterior inside the cab on the dashboard here, and even the steering wheel and the steering column is Miami cream. So it's interesting, why Miami cream? Well, Miami cream actually was never offered on a Ford pickup truck. It was offered on a Ford custom sedan in 1949, and for 1 year. But that's the cool thing about customs. You're making a work of art. You don't have to be historically correct. You can just design it the way that you want to. And boy, they hit it out of the park with this one. One more. Why Miami cream as opposed to something else? My hunch is that a marketeer decided one day that it would be a good name for it, and that it would kind of be based on some of the Art Deco buildings and their colors from the city of Miami. That's my hunch. This is just so cool. Take a look at the instrument panel here. You've got 5 old style but modern gauges. Your speedometer's over here. Your fuel gauge is here. Oil temperature gauge, voltmeter, and your water temperature gauge. Just a gorgeous car. I should mention also that you got this beautiful 2-spoke steering wheel here. It's a tilt steering wheel. You pull this little lever over here and you can tilt it up or down. Vintage Air manufactured this air conditioning system here, and you've got the controls for that just here, here, and here. And one of my favorite things in the cab is this shifter knob here. It is extremely cool. It's an automatic transmission truck, but you've got your shifter in the floor, and the shifter handle is just that silver color is just perfect with all the other chrome in here. The rest of the interior is mahogany colored, and again, I think that the folks that designed this custom pickup truck just knocked it out of the park. So I wanted to point out these deep dish wheels. Again, they've carried over that beautiful Miami cream color onto the wheels, and it just creates a stunning effect. I'll mention also these hubcaps. These are on the rear of the vehicle. Mention these hubcaps. Back in the day, they called them dog dishes. Sometimes called them poverty wheels. They also call them soup bowls, but they're kind of interesting. And again, this is just a gorgeous car, and the wheel is part of the effect. So I can't wait for you guys to get a peek under the hood of this vehicle. It's amazing. Once again, they've carried the Miami cream color on the inside of the engine bay and on the various parts of the engine. The valve covers are Miami cream. The distributor cap is Miami cream. The air cleaner cover is Miami cream. If you could look back here, you'd see that the transmission is painted Miami cream. Even the oil dipstick handle is Miami cream. This is just gorgeous. This is a great engine, a 347 Ford crate engine, stroker engine, and presented very well. Now we're going to take a look at the bed of the pickup truck. I think I mentioned earlier, it's 6.5 feet long, and back in the day, Ford would have put oak as the wood on the floor of the bed, but the folks who restored and modified this truck, designed the modification, instead chose a wood called bubinga, which is an African hardwood. It's known as a very strong wood, and it is just gorgeous. It's probably weather resistant when it's stained properly. I don't know that for sure, but my hunch is that this truck isn't going to see much bad weather. It's just beautiful. The final thing I'll mention is the Ford script logo on the tailgate here. Whoever designed this modification saw that the best presentation for that script logo would be in brown to match the wood on the other side of the tailgate. I just think that's incredibly clever because it's the only brown paint on the truck. And just a beautiful truck, well presented all around, and we were so happy to have it as part of the Savoy Customs exhibit. So I mentioned earlier that after World War II, the automakers began selling pre-war models. There was pent-up demand. They didn't need to redesign them. This is one of the first redesigns after World War II. It's called a shoebox Ford. The shoebox Ford debuted in 1949 with the 49 model, and Ford was having some financial trouble at that point. And arguably, this car might have saved Ford. They sold over 1 million of them in the first 18 months after the shoebox Ford was introduced. When you look tasteful up in the dictionary, you get a picture of this car. It's just beautiful. It has these, I've heard them called ponton, and I've heard them called pontoon sides, kind of slab sides, no articulated fenders. It was the first Ford built without a running board. It's just gorgeous. We'll take a look at some of the features here. You've got this split windshield. You've got this beautiful hood ornament up here that is die-cast metal with a plastic insert. I tried to look up and see if there was a name for that hood ornament, but I couldn't find one. It's artsy, it's beautiful. You can buy these online, but they're often scratched. This is just perfect on this car. It's got this chrome that goes up to the split windshield. The split windshield slopes. It's just beautiful. At the front, you've got a nice bumper and a bullet nose, this is called, up front. It's a beautiful car. Now let's take a look inside. So moving inside the car, once again, the Miami cream has been carried over into the interior just like on the truck. This is just gorgeous. There's nothing, okay, here we go. So moving inside the car, you'll see that the Miami cream has been carried over into the interior just like on the Ford truck that we looked at a few minutes ago. Boy, this is gorgeous. Clean, classy. There's nothing pretentious about this car because if you're driving this car, you don't need to be pretentious. You're driving a work of art. It's just beautiful. You've got the two-spoked steering wheel here that's gorgeous. The horn here within the Miami cream is so pretty that you want to blow the horn when you look at it. It's just gorgeous. You got a radio over there, a clock, and very simple, clean layout with a speedometer here. Just a gorgeous interior. Seat belts in this one, unlike the truck, which didn't have seat belts. And in the floor, you've got a parking brake. Obviously, a modification. Once again, the lines on this car are just sleek. It's beautiful. The beautiful cloth convertible top. I mentioned earlier that this was a 1950 Ford Custom. It was actually a custom before it was ever customized. For the 1950 models, unlike the 49 models, the standard level of trim was called a deluxe, and the upper level of trim was called a custom deluxe. So it was a custom before it was ever customized. Taking a look at the rear of this car, it's just beautiful. You got the big chrome hinges here. Again, just so clean. These tail lights blend into the rear quarter panel. If you look at the hood latch is just up under here. You can fold down one of these little chrome pieces here, and that's where you insert the key to unlock the trunk. Again, just a gorgeous car presented in Miami cream. It's beautiful. So we're looking inside the engine bay now of this 1950 Ford Custom, a Custom that's been customized. It's just so beautiful. They've carried over the Miami cream throughout the engine bay there and on some of the parts of the engine. An interesting thing about this that is different from the truck we looked at earlier. This is the same 347 cubic inch stroker crate engine by Ford that was also in the truck. An interesting thing that we didn't see on the truck was the VIN number is stamped into the firewall on this 50s convertible. Again, just beautifully presented, a great car and so classy. So I'm standing next to this beautiful 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air convertible. It's a Restomod. We'll talk about that more in just a minute, but let's talk about the 1955 model. The 1955, 1956, and 1957 Chevrolet Bel Airs, Nomads, 150s, and 210s are known today as Tri-5 Chevrolets, and they're among the most collectible automobiles from the middle part of the 20th century. The story, the background is that in the early 1950s, Chevrolet had gotten a little stale from a design standpoint and also from a performance standpoint in the early 50s. So the company made the decision to redesign the Chevrolet Bel Air line for model year 1955. The head of the General Motors design studio at that time was a gentleman named Harley Earl. Mr. Earl, everyone called him. Legendary figure. In addition to being credited with the design of the Tri-5 Chevrolets, he's also credited with coming up with the idea for the Chevrolet Corvette, and also for the designs of the General Motors cars with the big fins during the 1950s. Well, the story is that Mr. Earl in the early 50s would go to the European automobile shows. And at one of those shows, he saw a Ferrari with what he called an egg crate grill. Now, he called it an egg crate grill because back in those days, egg producers carried their eggs to market in these crates that had these cardboard dividers so that the eggs wouldn't touch one another and wouldn't break. So Mr. Earl got back on the phone, called his designers in Detroit and said, incorporate this egg crate grill into the 1955 Bel Air that you're working on. And they've just hit it out of the park with this model. It's gorgeous. There are so many features to talk about. Every one of the 15 models that Chevrolet sold in 1955 had this airplane hood ornament, exactly the same hood ornament with these dual vertical stabilizers. Very aerodynamic, just beautiful. Look at these eyebrows over the headlights on this. And finally, these bumper guards. People used to joke that one of the rules for working with Mr. Earl was that you couldn't put too much chrome on a car. And again, they just hit it out of the park with this beautiful 1955 Chevrolet. Notice the chrome trim down the side of the car. For the 1955 model, you had the split chrome. For 1956, again, another classic year, you had one long line of chrome. For the 1957 year model, the line of chrome actually split and you had an aluminum piece between the lines of chrome. Just a gorgeous car, a classic car, and we're so happy to have it as part of the museum collection and as part of this exhibit. So when they introduced the 1955 Bel Air, from a marketing standpoint, they called it the hot one. And it is a hot car. It's beautiful. You can see it's got this curved windshield here. It's been called variously a wraparound windshield, a panoramic windshield, a sweep sight windshield. It wasn't until the early 1950s that it was possible to manufacture this curved glass, at least economically. And it was introduced, the wraparound windshield introduced on the 1955 Bel Air. It's just gorgeous. They also started putting V8 engines in these cars in 1955. Chevrolet was really proud of that, and you see they've celebrated that with the V over the steering, or behind the steering column here. There's also a V on the passenger side. You've obviously got gauges and the speedometer over here, and a couple of warning lights. But on the passenger side, inside the V, there's a clock and a radio speaker. But lots of customizations on this car. You've got a tilt steering wheel. The handle is over here on the left of the steering column. You've got heating and air conditioning controls just here. And I don't believe everything that I read, but I did read that there are 987 little Chevrolet bow tie cutouts in the silver piece that goes across the dashboard. Now let's take a look at the rear of the car. So several interesting things I'll point out at the rear of this 55 Bel Air. One is the location of the fuel filler door. It's on the side of the car back here. For the 1956 model, the fin had gotten a little higher. The fuel filler door was actually behind the tail light. You would open a little door with the tail light on it and to add fuel to the car. By 1957, the fin had gotten higher, and there was a little door below the tail light that you would open to get to the fuel filler cap. Several other interesting things about this. You've got the dual bumper guards back here. Again, lots of chrome on the car. And then I mentioned that for the 55 models, they started installing V8 engines in the Bel Air. Well, the cars that were outfitted with the V8 engines got little V8 badges that you see below the tail light here on either side. Again, just a gorgeous car, a classic car. So now we're going to go inside the engine bay of the 55 Chevrolet Bel Air. And back in the days, the Chevrolet marketeers called this car the hot one. And when they customized it and added this big engine, they made it a lot hotter. They also managed to fill up a lot of space inside the engine bay when they did. It's great. Lots of power here. It's a 350 cubic inch engine. It's fuel injected, and that's a supercharger up there. This is great. Well presented in chrome and red. I like it. So the next car we're going to take a look at is this beautiful 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air Nomad station wagon. It is absolutely gorgeous. First, let me tell you a little about the term station wagon. Why is it called a station wagon? Well, that term actually dates back to the days before there were automobiles. Back in those days, resort hotels would send these big covered wagons to the train station to pick up tourists and their luggage, and those got to be called station wagons. When automobiles were invented, they began to do the same thing with these newfangled machines. So that's why we call them station wagons today. This was the most expensive Chevrolet model, most expensive of all 15 Chevrolet models that was offered for 1955. It's just gorgeous. For Chevrolet, it was what they called a halo car. They realized that not a lot of people would be able to afford the price of this car, but it was beautiful enough and unique enough to lure people into the Chevrolet showrooms where they would buy something that they could afford. Again, called a halo vehicle. And it's just gorgeous. You got the front end that looks like the other Bel Air that we took a look at a few minutes ago. Same airplane hood ornament up front. But going back here, something that you couldn't see on the convertible was this forward-sloping B-pillar. So much styling in this car. The car designers called this the A-pillar and this the B-pillar. And look how it just slopes forward. It just looks so graceful. And then look at these gorgeous ribs that go across the top of the car. There are 9 of them. These are totally non-functional. They're just for design and for beauty. Again, you've got the wraparound windshield around the back, lots of glass back here. It's a 2-door station wagon, which is kind of interesting in and of itself. There was a less expensive model station wagon that Chevrolet sold back in those days called a Beauville, but the Nomad was the top of the line. Now let's take a look inside the car. Once again, lots of styling inside the Nomad. You've got, again, 987 little Chevrolet bow tie cutouts on the piece across the dash there. And those disappeared for 56. They had a different dashboard layout for the 56 models. But it's just gorgeous. You've got a 4 shifter on this one. It has an overdrive automatic transmission on this car, and air conditioning. Just gorgeous. You take a look at this upholstery here. This is what Chevrolet called back in the day a waffle pattern. And just so much styling, so beautiful. These are great cars. I love these Tri-5s. Now let's take a look at the rear of the car. So coming around to the rear of the vehicle now, again, just super styling. It's beautiful. You've got these 7 chrome strips, vertical strips on the tailgate back there. You've got the Nomad badge above the strips. I assume that's anodized aluminum, but I don't know. It's presented as gold. It's beautiful. The way the tailgate works is it folds down, and then this glass piece here pops up. So much glass on the rear of this car is just gorgeous. Top of the line Chevrolet model for 1955. Now let's take a look inside the engine bay. So before we talk about this big Chevrolet engine in this 1955 Chevrolet Nomad, a quick story about the Nomad. Chevrolet debuted an experimental car that it called the Chevrolet Nomad Sport Station Wagon at the New York Automobile Show in 1954. People raved about it. It had a Corvette front made of fiberglass and a station wagon rear. And again, it was a big hit at the show. Well, they then decided to do the station wagon that became the Nomad, the production model. And they didn't want to detract from the production model, so they actually intentionally destroyed the car that was on display at the New York Automobile Show. Little piece of automobile trivia for you. Speaking of Corvettes and big engines, this is a Chevrolet 350 cubic inch engine. It's a ramjet fuel-injected engine and provides a lot of power, and like the Bel Air, it fills up a lot of the engine bay, and it's just great. You've got the black paint that matches the exterior of the car, and just a beautifully well presented car. And again, the Nomads were among the more popular Tri-5 Chevrolets. So in the early 1930s, the US, the world really, was in the middle of a Great Depression. People in large cities stood in long lines for food offered at soup kitchens. Not many people had money to buy new cars. So the automobile manufacturers were struggling as well. In the middle of all this, Ford undertook a redesign of its product line. And that redesign was headed by Edsel Ford, Henry Ford's son. Now, Henry Ford pretty much called the shots at the Ford Motor Company, but Edsel did influence him from time to time with regard to updates to cars from a design standpoint and with regard to mechanical design changes on the cars. But with the 1933 model, which this is, Edsel Ford and his team hit it out of the park. This is a 1933 Ford Model 40 two-door Restomod, two-door sedan Restomod. I should mention that two-door is spelled T-U-D-O-R, and you would think that obviously is a reference to the Tudor family of England that reigned during the 1500s, but in Ford speak, a Tudor car was a two-door car. A Fordor car was a four-door car. But at any rate, they hit it out of the park with this 1933 Model 40. It's just gorgeous. With this model, Ford increased its sales by 44% over the year previous, 1932. Of course, they were coming off a fairly low base for 32. But let's take a look at some of the features of this car. This is a Restomod. It has a 350 cubic inch Chevrolet V8 in it now. Just gorgeous. We'll talk about some of the safety and comfort features inside the car. But first we'll talk about this Greyhound hood ornament. Ford acquired the Lincoln Automobile Company in the 1920s, and Edsel Ford adopted the Greyhound as the mascot for the Lincoln division, and these Greyhound hood ornaments that symbolize speed and grace were on Lincolns in the 1920s and started appearing on Fords in the 1930s. Below that, you've got the blue oval Ford logo, and then this beautiful sloping grille. It's just gorgeous. Some people say it looks like a heart, some people say it looks like a shield, but it's just beautiful. A vintage V8 logo in the middle of it there. I've heard these headlamps referred to as acorn headlamps, and below them you have these dual horns. And now below the grille here you have this beautiful curved bumper, and notice how it slopes down in the middle. The reason it slopes down is solely for the purpose of not detracting from the beautiful grille, the base of the beautiful grille. Now we'll take a look at the car from a side standpoint, and you're going to love the stance of this car. Look at the stance of this car. Is there any question why this car has always been popular with hot rodders? It looks like it's just made for speed, like it's raring to go. It's a beautiful car. We'll walk around and take a look at several features on the side of the car. You've got these forward-leaning hood louvers here. And look how the hood is curved so that it fits over the fender. The lines on this car are just incredible. Notice you've got this dual pinstripe that goes down the length of the car. Just beautifully presented automobile. Suicide doors. The doors open out this way, and back in the day, people actually got killed because the door would be partially open and the airflow would cause it to open completely, and people in the days before seat belts would fall out of the car trying to get the door closed. But today we call them suicide doors. The lines of this car are just incredible as you move to the rear. Now let's go back behind the car and take a look at the rear of the vehicle. So moving around to the rear of the car, look how this pinstripe, double pinstripe, just wraps around the back of the car. And that red just perfectly matches the beautiful red wire wheels on the car. It's a great idea to paint the wheels red. Gorgeous. We've got a luggage rack back here with a vintage V8 logo on it. The luggage rack will actually fold down so you could put luggage on it, tie it down that way, or I suppose put luggage inside of it, or maybe a spare tire back here. And then you've got the rear bumper that matches the front bumper. And again, it curves down in the middle just like the front bumper. Very graceful, very stylish. Now let's take a look at the features inside the car. So going inside the car, they've carried the exterior paint color through to the inside. Gorgeous gray with burgundy interior or burgundy upholstery, and all kinds of features on the inside for comfort. And beautiful steering wheel here. They call this a banjo steering wheel because if you use a little imagination, the 3 spokes look like strings on a 5-string banjo. You've got the vintage V8 in the middle of the steering wheel, and you've got updated but traditional looking gauges here. You've got water temperature gauge, fuel level gauge. You've got a speedometer with the odometer and a trip odometer. Over here you've got the battery and the oil temperature gauge. In the middle here, right behind the steering column, you've got a Pioneer brand cassette tape player. And just gorgeous. You've got air conditioning over here, and just beautifully done. This is a great car. They sold over 300,000 Model 40s for the 1933 model year, and I believe over 100,000 of them were the same two-door sedan style as this model. So going under the hoods really, of this 1933 Ford Model 40, we'll see that when it was customized, a 350 Chevrolet engine was added. I'll tell you, with the stance that this car has, it's really easy to see why it was so popular with hot rodders back in the day, and today. So when you customize a car or a truck and do it well, arguably you create a work of art. It's a work of art that represents the imagination and the creativity of the person who designed the customization and the craftsmanship of the folks who performed the customization. The 5 Restomods that we've seen today are all very well presented, and we're proud to have been able to display them to the public during the Savoy Customs exhibit. Thanks for watching today. I'm Steve Starling, and we'll see you next time.